Thus, one was explaining the shape would change with the felt hat earlier, from the invention of felt hats, or fast forward to late 18th or the second half of the 18th century until later on, until the 1830s, really. And one can see that either on very realistic paintings they had, because photography was not invented yet, and or fashion illustrations which really began to appear in the late 18th century France, I fancy. Actually, fashion illustrations appeared before, probably from the mid 18th century, but sometime during the 18th century in France, I think it was. Anyhow, one may see that the brim, they had different sorts of hats. Well, they had top hats, was really they still had bicorns and tricorns, which were made out of felt, not gossamer, not like later on. Bicorns and tricorns were also made out of gossamer, but initially, once they were actually in fashion, not just worn by the military and the navy and the marines, but and servants, but actually worn as part of civilian fashion. They were clearly made out of felt, with or without plush and whatever type of plush it was, usually a fur plush, laminated on top of it. But anyhow, with the hats that had a brim, the brim always looks to some extent flexible and thinner than that, because the brim also was felt with the gossamer, except if the brim is on 2 plies of gossamer and thus still retains some flexibility, like upon the... Well, I will come on to that. And I say, people... I was wearing that hat yesterday for the first time. I actually wore it for perhaps 2 hours, walking the dogs outside, and it is now winter in Dubai, so it was about 18 degrees, 17 degrees Celsius, which is a room temperature, which is a medium temperature, but obviously the medium, what I would call warm, medium, lukewarm, not the medium chilly, which is from 1 degrees or 0 degrees to 2 degrees. But still, it was not hot, it was not warm, which would be from 20 degrees Celsius. It was still 3 degrees, or at least 2 degrees below that. And this hat is very light and only 1 ply of gossamer, but obviously it does still require a headband to protect it, which will be damaged too quickly. And also say that that was the ideal warmth. I wore that, walking and all. I was not obviously running. And honestly, even 2 plies, I knew, would have made me a little bit too warm. And I was also say that, imagine when they were made out of felt. Obviously one was warmer, one felt warmer. In fact, I had some cheap until recently, and it became too small because I put it in the washing machine. I should not have, but it was a modern American cotton felt bowler hat from 2010. A soft felt, and still it was much warmer than that. Felt is warm. So even if that is almost warm with 1 ply of gossamer, that is also the reason for which they changed it to gossamer during the 1800s, to some extent 20s even. Because initially, again, gossamer must only have been at least 90% of the time used for silk top hats, and that must have begun at least in 1820, because I have seen, I think the ad was from 1819, the oldest ad. If it was popular to the point of putting it in an ad, knowing that ads were not that common even in France then, it means that it must have been the first ones, perhaps by then at least 1810, by like the very first chap wearing it, and from then on it caught on to 3 chaps, and then 10 chaps, and then a sort of microscopic minority that then became a sort of small minority, and then there was like that with fashion, and then a sort of a little bit small minority, almost medium, and then a medium minority, and then almost until it was just a common thing within the elite, common enough for the French to think, well, we will advertise it, we will take the time of paying somebody and ask him to wear that hat. So I reckon it must have appeared sometime in around 1810, a little bit before, a tiny bit after, not 1820, that it really first existed, the gossamer, and it must really have been for silk plush, that material, only made in France again, ever only made in France. Now, yes, so, but the majority of hats, well, again, also to come back to hats, that was not only for top hats. People say the bowler hat was invented in 1846 by Lock & Co. hat, I think, and by a man called Bowler. This is true, but it actually existed before, as in a round hat existed before, way back. I think it started even to some extent in the 15th century in Peru or whatever, to have round felt hats simply made out of felt. And at least in the 19th century I have seen at least one ad, again a French ad from, I think it was 1818 or 20, there's max 20, a drawing a person. Back then they were not putting as much money into ads, so they were not realistic, almost photographic like engravings that they would have, for example, in the American fashion plates commissioned for the brand American fashion of the late 19th century. Now, they look more or less cartoonesque. They do not look realistic, but the clothing looks more realistic, and to some extent it can look almost, yes, realistic, and the clothing at least. And anyhow, these hats, some people will call it a bowler hat. A hat to be presented on all their fashion plate I'm talking about. Again, these are all from the online digital collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Fashion Plates. Anyhow, it shows a hat which is long, perhaps this length, I would say, this length, or perhaps even a little bit taller. This is about I will give the measurement in centimeters because it is more accurate than rather than saying 6 inches and 3/4 of an inch and whatever, so it is more minute. This is not, oh, it's hard to measure. So I'm right, this is 16. Shit. It's hard to measure because the ruler, the zero starts after, so if that makes sense. It's basically 14.5. It's a tad more than 14.5 only. So it must have been around, maybe it was a 15 centimeter hat, no, a bit more, perhaps 16, 17 even. And instead of being sort of bell tapered there, it's very straight, but then it was a little bit rounded like that here. And some people might say, no, this is a sort of one of the many styles they had back then of top hats. But really then it does not make sense that they call the Cambridge hat, which was worn by William Churchill, an in-betweener, ergo a hat that was in between a top hat and a bowler hat, or a round hat, I would call it a round hat. Because bowler hat is really a subtype of round hats. So many hats called bowler hats are really more round hats. Anyhow, so And then each bowler hat also has subtype. Each subtype has then a subtype. Like they have metal, black metal, and then